Someone said it'll come along as long as none of that Scottish nonsense, is that right? How's it going so far then? Right, I'm going to hand you over to Colin, who's going to do the Immortal Memory. This is the serious bit, ladies and gentlemen. This is your educational part of the evening.
Colin in charge.
And Avro's filming this, and our timer apparently runs out at 13 minutes, or it did last year, so let's try and keep it under that this year, Colin. So I'll hand you over to Colin.
Hey!
Thank you, and a very, very good evening to you all, to ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, Andrew, Richard. But it is nice to see so many old and familiar faces. Here we have the familiar faces. And, anyway. I mean, a very happy new year to you all. I'm sure that some of you will have sung Auld Lang Syne when the bells came. Is that right?
Yeah.
And of course, in England, you probably knew about 2 lines and then just carameled your way through the rest. Snogging the face of your nearest neighbour. But that's Bradford for you. Any New Year's resolutions that people have made? I mean, I made a few. I did make a few. I decided that I wasn't going to swear. I decided that I wasn't going to drink. And I decided to abstain from sex.
2 out of 3, bud.
Then I just thought about it and I thought, bugger that. What's in there? So Andy's quite right that we've come over with some virgin... no, sorry, not virgins, they're not virgins. We've come over with some friends who are Burns Night virgins from Addingham. But it's okay. Some of them indeed have lived and worked in Bradford previously. So they're well tooled up. And they know that if it all kicks off, just grab as much whiskey as you can and I'll see you in the car park. I mean, it's great that you're here. It's been terrible, terrible weather. I mean, the snow, tons of the stuff. I mean, people were stuck on the M6 overnight. And poor Richard, he got stranded. He was out there, stuck in the snow, hour after hour. On the moors he was, searching, looking, trying to find a wee marker just to show him where he was. And hours he was out there. And then finally he got a signal, and he rang me. And I said, Richard, for Christ's sake, come home. It was only a pound con, you tight bastard.
Don't clap!
Now, save your strength, there's another hour of this.
No!
I was talking to one of I was in the pub the other night in Addingham, and I was talking to one of our village characters. Now, when I say village characters, that's a euphemism for he's a pisshead. Tony, don't worry, it's not you. Sorry, it's not you, just to be clear. But I was talking about coming over to a Burns night, and he told me this wee story, you see, about when he was out somewhere, and a Scottish guy, there was some whiskey on the bar. He'd ordered one for himself and one for his pisshead, a friend of mine. And what he did was he got a wee worm from outside and he dropped it in a glass of whiskey. And the worm, it died. Oh. And then Mick says to him, he says, well, you know, what does that tell us? You know, he says, does it tell us that worms don't like whiskey? And the guy says, no. He says, it tells you, if you drink whiskey, you won't get worms. Drink to that. There was a complaint last year apparently about the Immortal Memory. I know who you are. Table 3. Looking up now. And apparently it was apparently the complaint was it was too short. Sorry. He said it was too bloody long. I beg your pardon. So I'll do my best. I'll try and keep it, you alright with that whiskey, Don? Bloody hell, I just got a wee glimpse of you there. Are you okay? So, do you? Oh, good. But at the end of the Immortal Memory, I had my climax was to read A Red Rose. And apparently it was, because the Immortal Memory is always done between the haggis and eats and the main course. And when I read the Red Rose, my stupid wee nephew there was trying to do a wee bit of mixing with music in the background, but so we had the Red Rose music. Thanks, Alex. I'm kidding. And I read the poem, and apparently it was very moving. And I looked at Janet Austen, and there were tears in her eyes. And when I spoke to her later on, I said, what do you think of that, Sheila? I said, you're moved, aren't you? I said, was it the words? She said, no. I said, was it the music? She said, no. I said, what was it, Janet? What was it? She said, I just want my fucking dinner. So the Immortal Memory. I was, like Andy here, my learner's friend Andy, I was scouring the internet for research. And of the Immortal Memory says that the designated speaker, that's me, talks to the audience, that's you, and delivers the Immortal Memory address. It should be rather serious and a careful consideration of the life and art of Robert Burns. It can be general, biographical sort of speech, or it may address a specific aspect of the bard's work that's relevant to the particular group of assembled celebrants. I wasn't going to do drunken debauchery. So tonight, we are going to turn our attention to the poem of Tam O'Shanter. And later, my dear brother here will read that to you in a very dramatic way. But the Immortal Memory speech should be long-winded enough to remind the guests that this isn't the office party. Yet not so long as to induce cramping, dry mouth, or ringing in the ears. So I reckon about an hour and 25 minutes should do it. The speech should bridge the dangerous chasm between serious intent and sparkling wit. That's where I thought I was going to struggle. Painting a colourful picture of Scotland's beloved bard. It always ends with the standing guests, i.e. you, raising your glasses with a heartfelt toast to the immortal memory of the Bard of Ayr. So that's what we're up for. All this in an hour and 25 minutes. Robert Burns. Of course I'm joking. Sometimes go over. Robert Burns was born on the 25th of January 1759. Died on the 21st of July 1796. He was only 37. That was about my age. Shut your bloody faces. Alright. No other famous writer, artist or musician has a yearly dinner committed to his memory over 250 years after his birth. Burns' night suppers are said to be held in over 200 countries throughout the world, which testifies to the far-reaching impact that his work has had. Robert was the first-born son of William and Agnes Burns, or Burness, as is actually the case. He decided later to drop the Burness and class himself as Burns. His father William was a farmer, and a poor one at that, and Robert learned to work the land on the family farm in Alloway, Ayrshire. However, William and a few others employed the services of a teacher called John Murdoch, and by the age of 12, Robert was studying Latin, French, and geography. He loved to read and devoured anything he could lay his hands on. In a review of his work in later years, the eminent Edinburgh bass critic Henry Mackenzie referred to Burns as a heaven-taught ploughman, implying that in the absence of a formal education, the young poet displayed knowledge and skills beyond his class. However, it has since been recognised that Burns approached his education with rigour and made full use of any teaching that was available to him. Unlike my big brother Andrew. Unlike. Having had very little success with farming, like my big brother Richard, who's a paramedic, and facing bankruptcy once again, William Burns died in 1784, Robert had already taken on the lease of another farm to try and ease the financial difficulties faced by his family. He was hard working, but by around this time, he'd only written 30 poems. That's 29 more than me. In the following 2 years after his father's death, it's accepted that he wrote some of his best work, which culminated in the publication of his book, Poems Chiefly in the Scottish Dialect. Released on the last day of July 1786, when Burns was just 27. I don't know about you, but I was not doing a great deal at 27. But this book would make him famous. In a letter that he wrote to a friend, he said, "I have at last made my public appearance and am solemnly inaugurated into the numerous class of authors." This first publication was reviewed very favourably by the likes of the critic mentioned earlier, Henry Mackenzie, and he was launched into the literary circles of the great city in Edinburgh. On the release of the second edition of this, Robert Burns received 100 guineas, which allowed him to live the high life. Basically, he went on the lash for the next 2 years. That's a bit like Richard. But he'd been busy in other ways too, for in the preceding year, 1785, the first of Burns's illegitimate children was born, and it's been suggested that there could have been a further 13, so 14 illegitimate children. I mean, that's a bloody good night out. He definitely had a weakness for the fairer sex. He loved women. Loved them. Some of them he loved several times. He had hoped to escape to America at one point by eloping with Mary Campbell, who he knew as Highland Mary, which would have conveniently left behind the pregnant Jean Armour, whose father had issued writs against Burns. However, he decided against this and he focused on his poetry following the untimely death of Mary. 1786 to 88 were his golden years. He had success, money, and a notable degree of acceptance from Scotland's men and women of the Enlightenment. His interest in women continued, of course, and he ended up with a writ from the pregnant Meg Cameron for the maintenance of her unborn child. Adding to this, it was the awkwardness of the arrival of another son to Jenny Clough, who was a servant of his confidant and lover Agnes Craig McElhose. And you get a dramatic plot to rival any contemporary soap opera. Basically, he was going at it hammering tongs. As his finances dwindled and the complexities of his love life spiraled, Burns did what many men do in this situation, which was to return to the bosom of his previous bud, Jean Armour. And they got married and took on a 76-year lease of a farm in Dumfries. As before, this did not provide him and his family with sufficient income, so he trained as a custom and excise man to help make ends meet. Now let me turn my attention to Tam O'Shanter. It's the only narrative poem of its kind that Burns ever wrote, which is seen by many to be a pity. He knew that he'd done something very special, and he wrote to a friend, Mrs. Dunlop, saying that when he's finished it, he said, "I have a finishing polish that I despair of ever excelling." This for him was a pinnacle. It was written for a colourful character called Captain Francis Gross, who Burns described as a cheerful-looking grig of an old fat fellow wheeling about your avenue in his own carriage with a pencil and paper in his hand. Sound like anyone you know, Richard? No? They'd met the previous year at the house of a mutual friend, Robert Riddle. Gross was a jovial chap, the son of a Swiss jeweller, no less. And he tried his hand at most things. He was a soldier, an art student, a paymaster, and Burns and him just hit it off immediately. He told Gross of all the things that were worth seeing in Ayrshire and suggested that he did a drawing of the famous Alloway Kirk, the burial place of his father and the scene of many a good witch story. Gross, who was looking to compile a book of Scottish antiquities, agreed, but on the condition that Burns provide him with a suitably scary tale. Robert Burns offered 3 short prose sketches, and it is these that form the basis of Tam O'Shanter. The poem that Andy's going to read is essentially about men, and drinking and having an eye for the ladies. Again, a good night out in Clare. As Tam O'Shanter and his pal, Suitor Johnny, sit drinking in the pub, whiling away the hours, they blether and flirt with little regard for the road home or what awaits them there. As he finally mounts his trusted horse Meg to head home, Tam comes across a commotion at the ruined church, and rather than run away, he decides to take a look. He's transfixed by the scene of ghosts and ghouls, witches and warlocks, all dancing to the devil's pipe and song, and his weakness for women takes hold once again. Tam lets out an excited, ejaculatory yelp at the sight. Easy, ladies. Ejaculatory yelp at the sight of one of the young witch's short skirt, and draws attention to himself, and then follows a terrible chase, where Meg gallops toward the bridge to take her master to safety. For every person knows that the diabolical visitant from the other side cannot cross running water. Meg only has to get Tam beyond the keystone of the brig. I won't give away the ending, but Andy will tell that soon enough. Nor shall I lecture you on the moralising message of the poem, warning us about the perils of drinking, blethering, and flirting. However, I will ask that you appreciate this tale as a work of art in which Burns invites us to consider the consequences of our actions. At the very least, heed this. If you go hanging about graveyards, half-cut, spying on the antics of the local Women's Institute, then you are likely to get what is bloody well coming to you. Finally, at 5 a.m. on the morning of 21st of July 1796, after one of his frequent illnesses, Robert Burns died, aged just 37. Some say that he was worn out by the harshness of his existence following years of hard work and farming. So not bad diet, too much booze and an insatiable appetite for ladies in it. Like many great artists, Burns was not necessarily given full recognition for his talents in his own lifetime. He divided opinion quite often, and it was not until about 20 years after his death that his body was exhumed and then moved from under a plain stone slab in St Michael's churchyard to a vault under a new mausoleum erected in honour of the great man. This was made possible by donations from admirers of Burns from throughout the world. Over 250 years after his birth, there were thousands of Burns suppers. There are thousands, held over and over again to celebrate the huge expanse of his work. Ladies and gentlemen, may I ask you to be upstanding? May I ask that you take your whiskey? That we now, that is going Malcolm, do toast the immortal memory of Robert Burns. I thank you.